Hey all, it's Cal here. For the next video, this one is going to be a bit different than the last two. The last two had a lot more to do with sort of the fandom and the movie, and this one doesn't really have that. Believe me, I checked. Though, considering what it's about, I'm not surprised. So, this video is going to be about the movie Our Souls at Night, which is a 2017 Netflix film that came out in 2017, starring Jane Fonda and Robert Redford. I like this movie a lot. I was kind of in the mood for something that was more, I don't want to say mature because it's not what this is. I mean, it is to a certain extent, but it's a slower paced movie. I'll admit that. But what you really have with this movie, I'll do a summary of the plot or try to. Basically, both of them are widowers. Um, Robert Redford's wife just recently passed away. Um, I and then Jane Fonda's husband. I want to say he also died. I can't remember honestly. Let's look at the plot because the plot is there for a reason. Um, yes, basically the whole premise of the movie is that Jane Fonda's character Addie comes over to see Redford's Lewis and basically says, "Hey, we're both old and lonely. Can I sleep with you?" But the kicker is it's not meant to be sexual. Um, it's meant to be just they're lonely and they're in there. I want to say that it's meant to be in their 70s. The whole movie's based on a book, so they're meant to really connect. And a side note here I'll mention now is what's really makes this movie work is their performance. It's just the thing holding the movie together, and it's a good movie. Do not get me wrong. There are some parts I have a problem with, but that's separate. It's not regarding their performance in it at all. Partly the reason why they perform so well together is it's not their first time acting opposite of one another. This is their fourth time. The last other times were in The Chase, Barefoot in the Park, and The Electric Horseman. And if I remember right, all of those films came out between 1960 and 1980. So they haven't acted together in a few decades. And this was one of the last films Robert Redford made before he retired 2 years later, or last year, technically. That is last year. 2020 has been a long year. Basically, they end up starting to sleep together platonically. Once at first he goes in the back door because he's concerned about appearances and people will talk because that's what you do when you're old apparently, and we'll all look forward to is we just talk about what's going on at the house next door, what's Mrs. What's Her Face, what's um he doing at her house, coming out of her house in the morning. He then goes for coffee later on in the film once they just start quote unquote sleeping together. He goes and has coffee with his buddies. His buddies kind of like, we see you with her, and they think, oh, something's happening. He gets upset and he leaves because he doesn't, at that point, he's not really made peace with that something might happen. And later on, things do happen. They decide to start a relationship. Um, what happens between that time, well, in the beginning of that time, really, um, is that at Addie, her son comes and drops off her grandson um, because he's going through some troubles. He's been laid off from his job, if I remember right, and the mother of the grandson has left. Um, I'm not sure if there's some mental health going on. I mean, he in the film is portrayed as a, later on we'll see, a bit of a drunk and a bit of a liar, so concerned about that. But basically it's more along the lines of he drops off the grandkid saying, hey, can you watch him for a while? And so they do. And the grandson, this is probably my favorite part of the movie, is really the focus that it puts probably a good third of the movie on the relationship between the Jane Fonda's character, the grandson, and Robert Redford's character, because it sort of brings them all closer together. Because in the beginning, the grandson's very technology focused. It's meant to sort of, I think, in some ways be a stand-in for the modern child. I might be wrong, considering it's based on a book, and the book, if I'm right, from my limited research, came out in 2014, 2015, one of those two. And basically, through the usage of a train set that Redford's Lewis finds in his basement that he and his daughter played with at one point, that ends up helping to sort of bridge that gap of the technology focused era with the older era. And they end up going camping. It's very sweet at first. What they're both concerned with is really portraying their relationship to her grandchild. And surprisingly, what never happens, which I thought was going to at one point, was he was going to refer to Robert Redford's character as grandfather or grandpa or something. But it's not that surprising, really. The whole time frame of the movies takes place over roughly a year, give or take, with some stuff we'll get into later on. Later on, when they come back from camping and her son comes back to come get his son, he kind of gets very upset at Jane Fonda, Addie, for bringing Lewis into her life, because what I'm understanding, and I could be understanding wrong, I'm not really sure, is that allegedly, from what I can tell, I'm not really sure where the basis for that is in the movie, at least from a narrative perspective, is he caused their family to break up, even though they really didn't, because it was really the death of her daughter that caused that, when her daughter was 11 and her son was 5, and she kind of blames it on him, but not really, or at least that's the son's impression, which we find out later on. But he then sort of blows up at her, and of the characters in the movie, I kind of like the son the least. He's not given a lot of screen time to really develop, so there's that. But what ends up working really is their performance, because they have time to breathe, and they have time to develop as characters. In the beginning, they're not very close, but at the end, they're a lot closer. What ends up happening is, at one point, Addie falls and breaks her hip. I believe it was her hip. And she goes to the hospital. And then later on, once she's back out of the hospital, and they then get a call later on, once the grandson's been picked up and goes back to her dad, or his dad, sorry. The grandson calls Addie upset because he's been left alone, and it's probably 9-10 o'clock at night, and he's 7, which is not okay. But they end up going over there. Addie on her crutches, and Lewis drives him over, and Gene, the son, ends up, her son, not their son obviously, ends up crashing into Lewis's truck because he's drunk. And that's when the whole thing comes up of, you always blamed me for the death of my sister, and it just felt clunky to be put there so close to, this is in the last like 20-ish minutes of the movie. It felt like something that should have come up earlier, and I don't know, it just felt very off to me. What ends up happening later on is Addie sells her house and is moving in with Lewis. Not Lewis, sorry. That would have been my choice personally. But the whole goal of the movie basically was that she ended up moving in. This wasn't the goal, I misspoke. But she ends up moving in with her son and her grandson because they need more help, because the mother, of course, never comes back and is never seen in the movie at all. I'm led to believe she kind of went off the deep end, whether it was drugs, alcohol, perceived mental health issues, I'm not sure. The movie never really gives us a reason, unless the reason is likely Gene's inability to hold down a job, and he ends up working as a roofer, and he has probably some alcoholism that he's not dealt with, which is never really dealt with in the movie beyond that scene where he crashes the car. So, I don't know. But she ends up leaving Lewis. They can't be together. I mean, they could, but she chooses family over Lewis, which I understand. It makes perfect sense. Um, and he ends up sending the train set that they were playing with earlier in the movie, and with it he sends a phone. That phone is has Lewis's number in it. So the end of the movie is really Addie calling Lewis and reestablishing that relationship, because the whole goal of the movie was not a sexual relationship. It was not even really meant to be a romantic relationship. That only happened because they fell into it. The whole real goal, and I think the theme of the movie, is connection, and more about the connection that you need to have as you age and how lonely things can be, which I think, especially when you consider that they've acted together in 3 other films, you can really see in sort of how they play off one another and how they really work the screen that they have that past experience. And it it was just very well done in the sense of their relationship, and the director did a good job of that. I kind of doubt the director had to do much for them, because they've both been acting since the 60s, so they probably know what they're doing. Um, what I did have more problem with was the son's character. The son's character, he seemed to be there more to sort of drive a wedge between Lewis and Addie, which is fine, I guess. But I would have liked just a whole movie of just Addie and Lewis and the grandson just doing things. I think that's something that is missing sometimes in, honest, I know, in some action dramas, whatever movies you want to talk about. The characters are constantly going from one plot point to the next, and a lot of times a movie can be more successful if it gives the audience time to understand, hey, this is what's going on, instead of being distracted by constant flashbangs or big action set pieces or astounding special effects. None of those things are bad, and really none of it is bad. It can be poorly done, but not bad for the sake of being bad. This kind of got off track a bit. That's okay. Um, but more, at least with this film, and I had said I called it a mature familiar, and that kind of works for what it is. It's more it more plays to an older audience. It doesn't play to a large majority of Netflix's 190 plus million subscribers. It also came out 3 years ago, so I don't know. Review's a bit late, but that's okay. What I more found good about this movie is that it caters to an audience that isn't dealt with a lot. You don't see movies for older people generally having a lot of success. And I'm not talking about Oscar dramas. I'm not talking about Oscar bait as a category, which isn't just old people, but can be seen as a bit highbrow. Whereas this movie fills sort of that era where you had movies that were more substantive, not that action movies or thrillers or anything genre related aren't substantive and don't have meaning or weight behind them. But when you have a movie like Our Souls at Night, or The Book Club, for example, or movies that focus on older audience that isn't normally catered to at all, whether it's on film or television, it's just a really nice thing to see. So this was a bit unorganized, but that's okay. I did it without a script this time, so, or I should say outline. Anyway, I'll be back with another video soon. Maybe tomorrow. Who knows? Hope you all have a good day or night, whatever time it is there, and I'll be back soon. Bye.